She was the first female national security advisor, and then the first African-American woman to serve as Secretary of State. She came out against Trump for president, but she became more nuanced once he was elected. She's a passionate defender of spreading democracy, and she's written a new book about it. So how does she defend Trump's America First agenda and sharing that classified information with Russia? Condoleezza Rice, welcome to our program.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
What do you make of this incredible development in the White House overnight that President Trump apparently divulged classified information to, of all people, the Russians? What if we do put all the pieces together and find out that actually, you know, an ally, a partner was compromised? It speaks to two things: the level of coordination and discipline inside the White House and the national security compromises, if there are.
Well, obviously, if it involves an ally, then you're going to have some work to do to make sure that that relationship remains strong. And I'm sure that whatever happened, there are efforts underway right now to reassure this ally, to go over what might have happened. So that you have to do, because there's nothing more important, by the way, than intelligence sharing among allies. But then there is the question, and look, I think this is a new administration. It's always a little bit more complicated in new administrations as the White House finds its footing, as it gets its relationships with other agencies. And Christiane, I will say also, of course, they have a steeper learning curve with this president, because he's never been in government, never been anywhere near government. And so, yes, there will need to be some tightening up of White House processes, some real understanding of when you go into a meeting like this, how much do you say? If you want to tell the Russians something because you're worried about, as the president said, something humanitarian, maybe that this is a threat that might affect the Russians. That's not a bad impulse. I do remember when the Russians shared information with us, but you have to do it very carefully, and that's where the processes in the White House have simply got to improve.
Let me talk then about democracy and where Russia stands on this issue, because obviously it's the title of your book, The Idea of Democracy. What do you make at the moment? I mean, the relationship between your administration and Russia was far different than the relationship between Russia and the United States today. What do you make of their interference, according to all U.S. intelligence, into the American democratic process?
Well, it is a serious matter, and it is a hostile act to interfere in our democratic elections. I tend to think, Christiane, that Vladimir Putin is a bit an eye for an eye sort of person. And he was really furious that we, particularly Secretary Clinton, said that his election in 2012 was fraudulent. It indeed had a great deal of fraudulence involved in it, and so it made him angry. I suspect he was getting back at us.
You mentioned Hillary Clinton. So my question to you is, was Hillary Clinton wrong to talk about the state of democracy in Russia? Again, you are very, very keen on the promotion of democracy. And the sad thing is that Freedom House, you know, its annual sort of index showing that democracy has been on the decline worldwide for the last 11 years. Surely the U.S. Secretary of State should have pointed out flaws in Russia's democracy.
Absolutely. And indeed, when we saw flaws in elections or in the way that Vladimir Putin was treating civil society or the cracking down on the press, President Bush himself and I certainly as secretary made those views known. And in fact, Secretary Clinton did nothing wrong in pointing out the fraudulent election there. But we need to defend the proposition that no man, woman, or child should have to live in tyranny. And that needs to be really at the center of American discourse with the world.
Well, it isn't right now, as you very well know. President Trump has made it clear that that's not his motivating factor. It's an America First policy, and it's generally about trade and jobs. So put that in context. Do you think the current State Department and the Trump administration is failing in America's traditional role of being the major democracy and human rights promoter?
Well, these are early days, and when Secretary Tillerson gave that speech, I saw a little more nuance in it, and he's come back and talked a little bit more about it. And so we are better off. America is better off. Forget America first, second, or third. America is better off when the number of democratic states in the world multiplies and when we have allies who are reforming. Because unless you reform in this world, you know very well that with social media, what happens in the village doesn't stay in the village. So somebody gets fed up in Tunisia, self-immolates, and it brings down the regime in Egypt. We need to tell our allies wherever they are, reform, give your people a voice, allow civil society to develop, and you will be safer too.
Politico's just had an article quoting foreign correspondents, whether they're in Venezuela or in Germany or wherever it might be, you know, basically worried that the example coming out of the Trump White House on democracy is giving many leaders either fear if they're allies or succor if they're not. They're saying, see, you can't point a finger at us.
Well, I think you will see over time that the presidency is very special in the United States. I noticed, for instance, that when the chemical attack took place in Syria, President Trump was moved by, as he said, Syrian babies choking on chemical gas. But then he said, we can't let that stand. Well, really what he was saying is the American president can't let that stand. So I hope that as he travels, he has an opportunity to meet some of those people who are struggling, to have just the very rights that we have, that he'll have a chance to meet brave people who are willing to go to jail if necessary, religious objectors who are willing to be persecuted. Because I think that over time, he will see, and the administration will be more forceful on behalf of these values. It's both a moral case for the United States. We're an idea. And if we really are endowed by our Creator with certain rights, then it can't be true for us and not for them. And so I am looking for greater voice for those people, particularly people who are struggling in places like Venezuela, just to be heard.
And I would just want to go back to what you said, you know, before the election, when that horrible tape came out, and you basically said, enough, Donald Trump should not be president, he should withdraw. As a Republican, I hope to support someone who's the dignity and stature to run for the highest office in the greatest democracy on earth. Now, you have since, and we've listened to you, sort of moderated your views. Why have you moderated your views, given the national security stuff that's come into focus now? And do you think, as our Republican commentator, Ana Navarro, has said, Republicans should stop being in thrall to what she called the cult of Trump?
Well, the reason that it's not a moderation of views, one important thing happened. Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, and I respect that. I respect our democratic processes. I respect my fellow citizens who voted for him and managed to get him elected. And so whatever I thought before this election, I'm going to try to give the President of the United States a chance, and I'm going to try to help where I can, because we only have one president at a time. That's our system. Now, I will not hesitate to criticize when I see things going on that I don't agree with. I will not hesitate to say to those inside of the White House, usually first privately, you're on the wrong course. I think any patriot owes it to the country and to the person that's leading it to say when things are going wrong. But I do think that this is a really fine national security team. I have great respect for Secretary Tillerson, who I've known for years. He's an oil man. Oil men know the world like other people don't. Jim Mattis is one of the best commanders of his generation, and H.R. McMaster as well. And so I have a lot of respect for these people. I know how hard it is in there. I know what it's like when things are swirling around you on a daily basis. And so I'm going to try to help. But no, I won't hesitate to criticize when I see things that I don't like.
On that note, Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State, former National Security Advisor, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you.